All right, welcome everyone to day 4 of our climate action talks here, the city of Fremont. Today we're talking about water and nature in the city. And as we've been doing on the other days this week, we're going to have about 5 or 10 minutes of CAP update beginning here. We have 3 different panelists or speakers here today to talk to you about different issues in this space. We'll take some questions in the chat after that, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for community conversation before we close out with a reminder about Consider It and what's coming up next.
All right.
Reminder that
thank you, Robbie.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to finish up by saying, just a reminder, when we get to the discussion portion, if you do want to speak, reminder to use that raise hand function on the bottom of your Zoom apparatus, or if you're on the phone, you can use *9. And we also are welcoming your questions and comments in the chat.
All right, thanks, Robbie. So just to kick us off here, I wanted to give you a quick overview of our climate action plan, the process, and kind of where we are at with our greenhouse gas emissions. So the city has a climate action plan. Our first one was adopted in the year 2012, and it serves as a roadmap for how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the local level in particular. Our first climate action plan had a goal of a 25% emission reduction by the year 2020. And so now that we are moving into the year 2021, we are currently updating our climate action plan to look out for the next 5 to 10 years. Next slide. To kick us off, we started with an adoption of a carbon neutrality resolution at the City Council in February 2019. And this carbon neutrality resolution set a goal for the city of Fremont to achieve net zero carbon emissions by the year 2045. We also set an interim target of a 55% emissions reduction, and that is really the goal that we're working toward within our CAP update. And within our resolution, there's also a post-carbon community framework that sets forth some overarching values, as well as some key strategies for how we can achieve carbon neutrality. Next slide. In terms of values, this is what was put forth in the carbon neutrality resolution. We're working to make sure that as we move forward with our climate efforts, we are paying close attention to equity and access, making sure that the solutions to climate change provide a benefit to everybody and don't disadvantage anyone. We're also really looking at how can we be as efficient as possible in our use of resources and also innovative. Fremont is a very innovative community, and we want to utilize the amount of innovation coming out of our clean tech sector in particular to the best of our ability. Health and wellness is also extremely important given our current circumstances, in particular, looking at how people are able to interact with one another, what is the cleanliness of the air, the water quality, these are all really important factors for us to keep in mind. And then finally, we want to be resilient and build capacity in our own community so that as we face new events in the future, whether they be things like pandemics or droughts or wildfires, extreme heat, we can be able to respond in the best way possible and keep our community safe and healthy. In terms of our strategies, we're looking at a number of ways to get to carbon neutrality using clean and renewable power and utilizing clean electricity and phasing out our use of fossil fuels are 2 key strategies for both the building and the transportation sector. And we talked about those earlier this week. Carbon sequestration is also really important as we think about how do we taper down the emissions we're putting out into the atmosphere. We can also think about how we are sequestering carbon that's already in the atmosphere through things like our urban forest. And we're going to dive more into that today. We've also this past week talked about mobility and connectivity, how people get around and how we can continue to reduce emissions in that space. We also yesterday talked about resource conservation and elimination of waste. And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the idea of our ecosystems and how we design both our natural and our urban landscapes in concert with nature more today. And finally, adaptation and resiliency is key throughout all of this, and we're planning on diving more into that in a future workshop. In terms of where we're at with our current emissions, as I mentioned, we have a 25% emission reduction goal by the year 2020, which we have achieved and actually surpassed as of this time. In 2018, we went past our 25% reduction goal. You can see in 2005, we started at over 1.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. And our goal by the year 2030 is to reduce that by 55%. So what you can see here in the projected emissions section of the graph is what we anticipate in terms of emissions reductions between 2020 and 2030 based on adopted state legislation that's currently in place. So this doesn't account for any new legislation that might be coming down, and this also doesn't account for any local action that the city of Fremont can undertake. So what we're trying to do in our climate action plan is really figure out how do we close this gap between the emissions that are already sort of in play to be reduced, and then what can we do at the local level to bring it down to our 2030 target of that 55% reduction. One thing to note here as well, you can see the yellow bar is where we've seen a substantial amount of emissions reductions, and that's in the building electricity sector as we've increased the amount of renewables coming into the grid, as well as supplied more on-site renewables with rooftop solar. The electricity sector has gotten increasingly clean in the last handful of years. And so that really puts a lot more emphasis on what we can do to reduce our emissions in transportation and in the use of gas in buildings, and then also to think about how we can sequester carbon locally, which is what we'll be diving more in today. So what we can do at the local level, are a number of things. We can adopt local ordinances, modify our building and zoning codes to layer in additional sustainability elements. We can also partner with different agencies to create incentive programs to help residents and businesses reduce their impact and also recognize them for their great work. We can, on the city level, upgrade our own infrastructure. We've done a number of efforts already. We've installed solar at city facilities, upgraded our streetlights, for example. We also collaborate regionally, both with agencies in Alameda County, such as Stop Waste and East Bay Community Energy. And we have partners in the public space, like the Alameda County Water District that's joining us today. And then we also can think about some of the larger regional coordination with groups like the Air District, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, et cetera. And then, as we get to the higher level at the state and federal level, we know that there's a lot of work being done to implement policies that will continue to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and make us more resilient. And so we can advocate for efforts that are going to support our work at the local level and also help bring in funding potentially to help us, because we know that a lot of this work can't be done without money. And, we want to pull in as many resources as we can to support our local community. Next slide. And through all this, collaboration is extremely important. We are the local government working on behalf of our residents and businesses, and we can't do what we're putting forth in this plan without the help of other public agencies. Again, just shout out to the Water District who's joining us today, as well as all of you, our community members who can help make this happen. So that's why we're putting on these workshops today. We want to make sure that we are taking into consideration your interests and your thoughts as we move forward. We have been doing quite a bit of community outreach already. We kicked off this effort with a large visioning workshop back in September, where we had about 160 participants. This week, we have been doing a climate talk every day at lunchtime. And we're also planning on having another workshop coming up in the coming months that will really dive into the topic of resiliency, equity, adaptation, and fostering additional community connections to help us with implementation. And we've done quite a bit of outreach directly to key stakeholders as well. One other thing to mention, Robbie, you can go to the next slide, is that we have been working we're putting the word out to the community about different possible ways we could reduce our impact through an online community forum called Consider It. And so you can get there by going to fremont.gov/cap-consider it. If you haven't participated already, please do log in and participate. This is your way to directly weigh in on some potential mechanisms that we could use to get us to carbon neutrality. We want to hear your voice. We want to understand what your thoughts and concerns might be, what you might support, what you might not support. And we also, have the ability for you to propose your own solutions as well within this platform. So it's a great way for us to have a community conversation as we move forward in this effort. Next slide. All right, so digging into our topic of today, water and nature in the city. Let's move to the next slide, Robbie. First of all, I just wanted to show you that at the community level, we capture emissions from some key areas. Transportation is the largest impact, followed by buildings, and then solid waste and water. And the emissions associated with these sectors are really what we see in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions coming from these processes. So, the burning of emissions and or burning of fuel, the tailpipe emissions for vehicles, use of electricity and gas in buildings. For solid waste, it's really, the amount of energy that it takes to move the solid waste to the landfill and then any off-gassing of that solid waste. And in water, what we're really capturing is only the energy used to transport and to treat fresh water and wastewater. And so it doesn't necessarily put the value on water resources when we look at it simply from an emission perspective. And that's why it's really important for us to look at how does water support us with our long-term climate goals and resiliency and our ability to sequester carbon as well as we think about our natural landscapes. So next slide, Robbie. When we talk about carbon sequestration, we're talking about the ability to draw down the atmospheric carbon to carbon dioxide that has been released through various processes, whether it's breathing out of air that we've breathed in already, but also all of the additional carbon dioxide that we've output into the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels and other fuels as we live our day-to-day lives. And so we've increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere since the time of industrialization substantially. And while there are natural sinks such as the land, soil, water, trees, our ability to continue to draw down those atmospheric emissions has been stifled by our rate of development. And so we're looking at how can we increase our amount of carbon sequestration as we continue to taper down the amount of emissions that we put into the atmosphere. So, there's kind of two mechanisms for getting us to carbon neutrality. Next slide. When we're talking about carbon sequestration in Fremont, there's a couple key strategies, and that's why we brought together this great panel today. We want to think about the efficient use of water resources, because as we experience increasing droughts and droughts that are more severe in nature, water management is really important for the health of our community as well as the health of our ecosystems. We also want to think about how we have a healthy and well-managed urban forest because, we don't have a natural forest, we have an urban forest. We really need to pay attention to the types of trees that are being planted, how those trees are being cared for, and maintaining those healthy growing conditions over time so that those trees live to the maximum potential that they can, and they can reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere by pulling in that carbon dioxide and turning it into a solid carbon form as those trees grow. We also want to think about ecosystem protection and preservation. So as we develop, as we think about our landscapes, both urban and natural, we want to make sure that we're supporting healthy ecosystem functions. And so looking at ways that we can integrate those ecological practices and natural design principles into our urban landscape is key. And with that, I think we're handing it off now to Thomas from the Water District. So Thomas, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rachel. So my name is Thomas Nizer. I'm the Water Supply and Planning Manager at the Alameda County Water District. Our group does a combination of managing our current water supplies as well as preparing for the future. We do demand forecasting as well as evaluate and develop new water supplies to be brought online in the future. And a critical part of that actually includes water efficiency, or traditionally called water conservation. We're trying to call it efficiency now because that's really what it is. And here with me today is my colleague, Stephanie Nevins, who is the supervisor of that program, because I'm sure there'll be some questions specific for her. The nature of the information we brought today is not so much about what are we doing to, say, reduce greenhouse gases and in that line. It's more what are we doing right now to prepare for the anticipated changes of climate change, because that is frankly a very serious threat for the community. And so we want to just give you a little background about ACWD and what we expect climate change to be doing to our existing water supplies and what the threats are for tomorrow that we're preparing for. Can I advance slides, or is that Robbie? Okay, we can skip these first couple slides. It's just a little background information that'll be in the presentation materials for posterity. But ACWD, who we are, is we are the water service provider. We do just the drinking water, not the wastewater, for the Tri-City. So while we love our dear friends and colleagues in Fremont, we also love our friends in Newark and Union City. We are established in 1914. We have approximately 350,000 residents in the community, 84,000 counts. And in order to understand climate change and our concerns, you have to understand a bit about our water supplies. We enjoy a very diversified water supply portfolio. And what that does is it gives us some flexibility both today and into the future. Next slide, please. All right. This, you can skip forward. I got a more detailed slide after this. I have a short window to speak, so I wanted to condense it a bit. So we have three major sources of supply. And as I mentioned, that flexibility helps us, and it will help us with climate change. The key to understand is that these three supplies are imported supplies that come from the Sierras, City of San Francisco supply that comes from Hetch Hetchy in the Central Sierra. Our state water supplies come from the Northern Sierra, and collectively those make about 60% of our water portfolio. The remaining 40% comes from the local watershed. So what we're looking at right now for climate change and the impacts on our water supplies it varies by the source. Our Sierra-based supplies, they are going to be subject to heavily the warming of the atmosphere. Those are snowpack-based supplies. So those systems are developed to capture water high in the Sierras, both water that's running off from rainfall, but also to rely on the snowpack at the higher elevations to hold water, and then that water slowly melts into the spring and summer, and then it continues to top off the reservoirs. So the reservoirs in those systems are not built to take all of the water and storage that we need in a year. They really rely on snowpack to store water for us as well. And as we see temperatures rise, we expect the snow line, the elevation at which we don't get rain, we start getting snow, we expect to see that go up. And so that's going to reduce snowpack, and it's also not going to work as well with the existing infrastructure, the dams and the waterways that have been designed around this system over the past century. So there's going to be a lot of challenges there, and we are anticipating reduced supply from these two sources. Locally in Fremont and the Alameda Creek watershed, those higher temperatures are going to drive up demand for water, especially if we don't address landscaping and make sure we're smart about the sort of landscaping that gets put in. Also, we expect the precipitation patterns to change. It's a little challenging for us because there's many varieties of climate models as well as assumptions about future emissions based on the variability and work that folks like you at Fremont are doing. We don't know how much carbon is going to be in the atmosphere 40 years from now. And so we have this wide range of scenarios, but the consensus appears to be that not only will the local area get warmer, on average, we're going to get a little wetter as well, but not necessarily in a good way. We're going to expect higher intensity periods of wet, and then higher intensity in terms of low precipitation periods of drought, as well as for those periods to last longer. So the challenges will be getting through longer dry periods, and then how do we handle those more intense flood runoff situations that we've seen just in the past few years. We had a record dry year in 2014, followed by a near record wet year in 2017. So we're going to see more of these extremes. And I'll just point out too on this graphic, we do have a large groundwater bank in the southern central valley called the semi-tropic groundwater bank. And that's an integral part of our system because we're able to store surpluses down there and call on that water during droughts. And we're really looking at that in more creative ways to help us prepare for climate change. Next slide, please. The other key thing that we're concerned about is, of course, sea level rise. And for those of you who are familiar with the Quarry Lakes and the Niles Cone groundwater basin, that's our water supply. The Quarry Lakes recharges the Niles Cone groundwater basin. And from this graphic, there's a lot going on in here, but you can see this is the basic schematic of how fresh water is put in out of Quarry Lakes, and that water pushes out against the bay. We're connected to the bay, which is salt water. And part of our management of the basin is to make sure that fresh water is pushing out and not the other way around. Now, as the sea goes up, that's going to exert more pressure for salt water to move into our fresh supply. So this is going to become a more tenuous operation for us. We have a long history of salt management in the basin, including contamination that came from earlier mismanagement of the basin, mismanagement by today's standards. And many folks may know we have a desalination facility that actually helps to clean up and remediate salt from the basin, and may be an integral part of our future climate change adaptation to address sea level rise. Next slide, please. Also mentioned conservation is a huge part of preparing for the future, as well as just responsible management today. This is a graphic. The state of California moved in 2009 towards what we call a per capita consumption. And this is a chart that you'll find in our planning documents that shows the Tri-City wide gallons per person per day. It includes what you folks are using at home, plus what's being used in offices, what's used for landscaping, what's used for manufacturing, all of that together divided through by the population. And what you can see on this chart in the blue is our actual gallons per capita per day over the years. It starts in the mid 90s. And the gray lines above it are actually efficiency standards that were adopted in 2009 by the state of California. And as I'll just very proudly point out, our community is well identified as being a very efficient community that has embraced conservation for a long time, in part because ACWD embraced conservation in the early 90s as an alternative to developing new water supply. So this community we're a little bit ahead of the curve in the state in terms of having invested in rebates and efficiency for a longer amount of time, and the results show up on this chart. And as we move towards a future of higher density housing, more multifamily, more transit-oriented, we expect at a certain point that's going to level out. But you can see that orange line is our current forecast that'll be published later this spring. And you can see from this chart, we are very well below the existing state efficiency standards. But the state is tightening those standards up, and my colleague Stephanie is working right now on that evolving application of the legislation. So there will be a lot of change coming here in the future. We're doing a lot of exciting things in this front, including a major investment into advanced metering infrastructure. Similar to PG&E smart meters, our customers will now be able to see in real time what their water is looking like. And that'll help people identify leaks. That'll help people identify when they're using water, where they're using it, where they can shave it off if they want to save money or if they want to protect the environment. So there's a lot of exciting things happening there. Next slide, please. So what else is ACWD doing at this time? We are pursuing a climate change adaptation plan. We need to formalize how we're going to address the changes moving forward. We are finalizing a new efficiency master plan that my colleague Stephanie is just putting the bow on right now. And we have two major planning documents coming out, one this spring, it's a statutory thing. And then the next one starting in 2023 is our integrated plan that will include a lot of public input on the future of ACWD and water supply management in the Tri-City. Next slide. And here's some contact information if you'd like to get more information from ACWD.
Thanks so much, Thomas. So now we're going to move over to Kit Joy from our Urban Forestry team, who will talk a little bit more about what we do in urban forestry.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Kit Jory. I'm the city urban forester. Right now, we're involved in multiple programs that we're focusing on, but a key component of any climate action plan is going to be growing a healthy urban forest. And the main component of that is an urban forest management plan. And that's what we're focused on right now. So on May 7th, 2019, CAL FIRE grant was issued to the city of Fremont in the amount of $860,000 for urban forest management activities. And part of that program requires a plan to reduce net greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide. To show a net reduction in greenhouse gas emissions through tree planting and carbon sequestration, we needed to show data, right? Well, prior to 2020, the city of Fremont had no firm numbers on our urban forests. We didn't know what the inventory was. We didn't know what it was comprised of. In order to know where we're going, we have to know where we're at and what we have. So in September 2020, the city completed a citywide tree inventory and canopy assessment and found that we have approximately 81,000 public and street trees. Next slide. In addition to the inventory, we also completed a tree canopy assessment. We updated the city tree website. We improved public outreach. We initiated a tree contractor certification program, and we broadened the 50-50 program to include pruning, not just removals. Next slide, please. The next step is actually creating the urban forest management plan, and those major components include the analysis of what we have, public engagement, the management of the plan, and the plan itself. Next slide. So as part of that plan, what we'll be doing is analyzing the inventory and the opportunities that exist. We'll be creating targeted goals. We'll be creating a new citywide tree planting list, and we'll be evaluating the city's resources that currently go towards trees. Next slide, please. Public engagement is going to be a major component of our urban forest management plan. In order for the plan to create a 40 to 50 year long-term plan and identify where the city wants to go, we have to know what the public wants in regards to an urban forest. And so this will include statistically valid surveys, several workshops, public engagement meetings, and so on. Next slide, please. The management plan will also include reviewing the current processes within the city, the tree protection ordinances, and a cost benefit analysis of where the city spends money on trees right now, and recommendation on how to maximize our services. Next slide. So we'll be creating a long-term 40 to 50 year urban forest management plan with targeted goals related to urban or environmental sustainability, best management practices, urban tree canopy growth, environmental justice, reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and a comprehensive urban forestry plan. Next slide. So we realize that we have many urban forest related issues, challenges, obstacles, and over the next 14 to 18 months, our goal is to take a proactive and progressive step in growing our urban forest. I tried to keep this short at Rachel and Robbie's request. So if there's any questions at all, feel free to reach out to our team. That contact information is below, and check our website pretty often. We have multiple updates going to our website on a weekly basis. Lots of new stuff being uploaded there. So thank you everybody for your time.
Thanks so much, Kit. And I'm sure there'll be questions as well to discuss related to that urban forestry plan as we get into the chat. Finally, we're going to have Tara from our community services department talk a little bit about what we're doing with the larger parks master planning effort. So Tara, I'm going to hand it off to you now. Tara, you are muted still. Let's see.
Okay, it wasn't giving me an option.
There we go. Awesome.
Sorry about that. All right, so is there a way for me to share my screen, or should I just, I don't think I have a share button.
Robbie will just advance the slide, so you can go ahead and tell him when to advance.
Okay, well, we can just go to the next slide. So this is okay.
We had some animation, I guess.
Yeah, this is okay. So what is the Parks and Recreation Master Plan? So essentially, much like the Climate Action Plan is, it's a roadmap for what we want our parks system to look like in the future. And so where should those parks go? What amenities should they include? Where should those amenities be? And we just need to make sure that these parks are going to support our recreation activities for the residents of Fremont. So what we're looking at is trying to assess the public's needs and looking at what kind of programs we currently have and what people say they want in the future, and also the environmental needs, sustainability, park maintenance, and we're going to establish priorities in terms of facility improvements and future development and land acquisitions in terms of where are we going to put these parks. We're also going to take a look at policies and practices and look at funding strategies and establish some maintenance standards. Next slide, please. So we've done and are currently doing a pretty robust community input process, including the launch of our website, inventfremontparks.com, where there's a comment box so anyone can provide any types of comments. There's also an app that we launched so people can be out at the park and send us back any kind of feedback on location. We have had several stakeholder focus group meetings, including over 200 independent individuals and stakeholder groups invited, several community input meetings, and we've also had a statistically valid survey followed by an online community survey, which many of you may have participated in. And we recently got some preliminary results back from that. So we're beginning to trying to interpret and analyze what it is residents are asking for. We've also done a demographics and trends report, which looks at who are the residents of Fremont, and perhaps the most significant piece of data I believe that came out of that report is right now the average Fremont resident is about 38 and a half years old. So we're a relatively young city. However, what's projected in the next 13 years is that the 55 and older population is going to increase significantly. So to be about 1 out of 3 people. So a third of us is going to be 55 and older in 2034 per this projection. I can't read the bottom of the second. Just to say recreation. Oh, we're doing a recreation assessment as well. So we're looking at all our recreation programs and a lot of mapping. Next slide. So we're also looking at in the mapping, we're looking at all of our assets and amenities at every single park, and we're actually geolocating them, and that will help us in determining and responding to things like park equity. So you'll see in the next slide what I'm talking about, but generally we're mapping out Fremont in a lot of different ways. Some of the ways you see here are population density, employment, commute to work. So we're looking at where are people and how do we connect them. We're also looking at environmental maps in terms of like sea level rise, fire hazard, and watersheds. Next slide, please. So one thing we're looking at is a 10-minute walk campaign, which is something that the mayor has signed on to. It's essentially a promise that by year 2050, we're striving towards a 10-minute walk for every resident, to a park for every resident in Fremont. So in this map, you see the little green spots that are kind of dispersed all over. Yeah, right, those. So those are city parks, and then the yellow is a 10-minute walk to those parks from people's homes. So you can kind of see in the pink areas and the darker pink areas, those are areas where those are the areas that are most devoid of parks. So we would be looking at land acquisitions in those areas. Next slide. And these are just sort of some examples of what we will be doing when we get to that phase of our project. But essentially, this is what we do with the data that we've collected from inventorying all these different types of assets. So on the left is where the playgrounds have been mapped. So you can see generally what areas they serve and which areas in this city, San Clemente, that are not being served by those amenities. And then to the right, there's this map shows indoor recreation space, and you can see where there's a community center and a senior center relatively close to each other, and then the rest of the city doesn't have a community center that serves those areas. So we're going to be looking at maps like those and trying to figure out where are the best areas to serve the Fremont residents. Next slide. So we've also gotten a lot of questions regarding what we're doing in terms of environmental and sustainability. And we actually have a lot of practices in place, including having passed a resolution back in 2009, which requires the use of native and low water use plants, and things like using compost and a minimum 3 inches of mulch, and a lot of other generally sustainable practices. And then also a few years later, following I think following the drought, the state also passed AB 1881, which restricts landscape watering. So they already had a restriction in place. They had WELO in place, which is the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. And it just really tightened it up and made it more strict. So, so the way Fremont has implemented some of these things is by not including any new lawn in park designs unless they're specifically active recreation areas. So we have no more lawn that's just ornamental, for example. We've taken lawns out of all our medians and replaced them with low water use planting. And we've got some people from ACWD here, but last I heard we were pretty far under the water budget for Fremont in terms of landscape irrigation. And we also, in all our parks, have smart irrigation controllers that are weather-based, and we use all point source irrigation, which is essentially drip irrigation. And if we have to use overhead irrigation, we use a special type of overhead irrigation, which really minimizes overspray and drift. Some other things we're doing outside of some of the legislation is just generally trying to make parks more walkable, and that is by requiring pedestrian linkages to existing pedestrian corridors like sidewalks, bicycle paths, and just park-to-park connections. And I can't read what's under parks, the pedestrian linkages, but we're doing things like making sure that we have standards in place for tree planting, because we really require people like developments to not only plant trees, but ensure that the actual planting pit that the tree is being planted in is large enough. And we actually have minimum requirements that are pretty generous that would ensure the longevity of these trees. So we also inspect the trees to make sure that they're starting off on the right foot, and if they're not at a minimum level of health, we'll reject those trees and we won't allow them to be planted in our city parks or medians, because we're really looking at the long term when it comes to that type of investment in our urban tree canopy, as Kit will attest to. Next slide. Is that it? Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Tara. So a lot of content today, and we have definitely been getting some questions in the chat for the panelists. So let me bring up one of the first questions. So a little bit probably more on what you were just speaking to, Tara. There's a question from Lynn Mailer about that resolution that you referenced in 2009 for the city to follow the Bay Friendly, now rebranded as Rescape Principles, and the more recent governor's executive order. So you talked a little bit about how that's being implemented, and I also would like to offer up. So Rick Connor has joined us from our team in community development, who review the plans that come in for new developments and in terms of their landscaping. Rick, would you like to add anything on this topic from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the information Tara presented was excellent. And, along with all of the conservation efforts that are being applied today, one quick thing is all the landscape plans that are submitted to the planning division for review, one of the requirements of the WELO, which is the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, is calculations have to be performed to show that the intended or estimated total water use is less than what the actual allowed water use will be. And if that number is not less than, if the estimated water use is not less than the allowed water use, then they need to go back and modify their landscape design to make sure that that number is less. Also, bioretention areas are great today, a great thing to have in the landscape. That allows the water to, it accumulates water and allows it to penetrate back into the ground and help fill the aquifers. There's a lot of other great information, but I think those are two critical elements that are now a large part of the landscape plans that are submitted.
Great, thank you so much, Rick. Tara, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's really great information. I'm glad you brought those things up, Rick. Thank you.
All right, and so we just want to get through the questions in the chat, and then if there's time, we can open it up for questions directly from participants. So there were also some questions directed at ACWD. This is probably a question for both the city and ACWD, thinking about, our needs for increasing the amount of housing in our community, especially, we have this with somebody in the chat asked about the RHNA, the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. How can ACWD continue to meet the demands of water for increased housing units that will surely be added to the city of Fremont?
You want me to pick that up?
Thomas, if you'd be willing to talk to that a little bit.
Certainly. Hot topic. In fact, we're just doing our future forecast right now, and we are including draft numbers that we put a lot of pressure onto the Association of Bay Area Governments to release in time for the water agencies to consider in our 2020 publications, because we all have to do it every 5 years on the fives. So we got advanced data for the 2050 build out levels. They are very big, and those are the numbers that go into and inform the RHNA numbers that are really set in Sacramento. And our published plan will include, it only goes out 25 years, but we're going to pull in everything out to 2050 so that the community can see what the impacts are. The answer is most of that demand will actually be met through two branches of efficiency: continued investment in conservation, largely achieved through our AMI metering system that I mentioned earlier, And second is that the developments are going to be redevelopment. They're displacing existing demand in the process, and they're high density. And so what we're seeing is higher efficiency indoor use for condos and apartments, and a shaving off of a lot of outdoor demand. So repurposing of how some of existing water use today is going to be part of addressing it. But we do anticipate more shortages during droughts if this level of development does occur. And we have been, in fact, I worked on a white paper with the ABAG to have that process include water supply and limitations in water supply moving forward, because it's been void in that process for 20 years. And we've been very vocal about it.
Thanks, Thomas. Another question specific to ACWD that came up in the chat was about the desalination plant in Newark and whether that itself is going to be protected from sea level rise.
Certainly. So the sea level rise scenarios, including what do they call them? Like the king tide flooding scenarios, the combination of those two things. There's a number of maps out there. Our facility, while it's low elevation, it is bermed up and higher, and right now is not a direct threat of those flooding events from any of the published information we've seen, but we will continue to look at that. The good news is that plant will help potentially help us intercepting salt intrusion that results from sea level rise. So that actually may be a critical part of protecting our water supply, but the facility does need to be safe, and so far it looks safe.
All right, thanks, Thomas. I think the next question is probably one for Kit. There's a question from Lynn Miller about how can we ensure that existing tree replacement ordinances are in fact enforced, especially recognizing that we don't have, you know, a lot of staff in our tree department, and how can we make sure that, you know, we can support that? Is there more budget needed? You know, considerations around resources and how we can manage that in the best way possible from the city perspective.
Wow, well, let me try to unpack that, because that's a lot. We definitely need more resources for urban forestry. I can tell you that the city has made a serious commitment to grow in urban forestry, as can be seen from the Urban Forest Management Plan that we're in the works of forming now. And the Urban Forest Management Plan itself is going to provide a lot of the answers that Lynn's looking for, specific to policy and where we go next. We have increased our public outreach and our letters to our courtesy notices to the public substantially in the last year, as well as our code enforcement efforts. So those are all areas that definitely can be improved upon, and that we have been working to improve upon. And I think once we get through the Urban Forest Management Plan, a lot of those answers are going to be presented to the city.
All right, thanks, Kit. So there's another question that just came in about whether the construction and maintenance of parks and landscaping will be considered in our greenhouse gas inventory. So I think, you know, maybe Tara, you could talk a little bit about kind of how we approach parks and the construction and maintenance of those, and then I can talk a little bit more about our GHG inventory process.
So we don't specifically measure greenhouse gases as parks are being constructed, and but we're always looking at new and innovative processes for reducing greenhouse gases in general, and that includes the maintenance of parks as well. You know, we've explored looking at you know, different types of maintenance equipment like mowers and blowers and weed whackers and that sort of thing that are that use electricity instead of fossil fuels. And we've looked at composting on site so that, you know, whenever we need to chip a tree, for example, we don't have to move it and use fossil fuels to move these things from place to place. If we can, we try to leave it on site. And that's the same with any kind of landscaping, we try to do with new construction as well. You know, we really try to minimize any disturbance. If we don't have to disturb an area, we won't. And especially goes for sensitive areas. We really try to avoid sensitive areas as much as possible. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a little bit of a challenge to answer from the emissions accounting perspective, because when we do our greenhouse gas emissions, we're looking at activity that's happening throughout the community, and we're pulling in data in terms of energy consumption across residents and businesses, in terms of vehicle miles traveled, you know, for passenger vehicles and freight vehicles. And then we're also looking, like I said, at the waste that is transported to the landfill and off-gassing of waste that happens, as well as emissions associated with water, transportation, and treatment. So anything that we're doing in parks that relates to that, you know, in terms of bringing in materials or bringing materials to the landfill, energy used in vehicles or construction, that would be captured in the overall inventory. But in terms of the impact to changes in land use and the ability of that land to sequester more or less carbon is something that we currently don't account for, but we're really trying to, you know, understand those impacts more holistically as we approach this park master planning effort, as well as our urban forestry management plan. So, you know, we understand that there's a lot of interplay between our departments, and we're all working very closely together on this effort. So I think there's a hand raised. We can go ahead and it's from a phone number. We can unmute you if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes, hi. I'm sorry, I'm calling from audio. I'm actually on 2 meetings at once, work meeting and this meeting. I wanted to ask a question about potable water. And was a couple of questions. My first question is, what is the city of Fremont doing when it comes to losing all the potable water that we lose every time we flush our toilets? There are toilets, as you know, that are older, that every time you flush, you know, there goes 5 gallons of clean, potable, perfectly good water away. And then there's the, you know, 1.6 gallon toilets that are new. There's the dual toilets and so on. And I wanted to know what the city is doing to have residents change their toilets, upgrade them. Do we have to upgrade them? Are you going to make it a law, maybe? And then the second part of this toilet question, comment, has to do with if you have thought of any ways to use gray water to flush toilets. I actually have a prototype out. If you guys are interested, I can pass it on to you. It is working in a house, not in Fremont, in Oakland. We made it, we are making it work. So it's, that's my other second half of the question, because I think it's pretty sad that we're throwing away potable water to flush a toilet when we could be using gray water.
Is that Begonia?
Yes. Hi.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I was like work meeting, so I couldn't do the other Zoom. I'm using Zoom in 2 places.
No problem. Yeah, thank you for your question, Begonia. So, you know, I can talk a little bit about that, and I think that ACWD can as well. You know, in terms of how water conservation is incorporated into city, you know, planning and building codes, the state sets a lot of the requirements for efficiency. So I've dealt a lot with energy efficiency in the building code, and, you know, every 3 years the building code is updated. So there are, you know, updates made to the levels of efficiency that we need to incorporate into new design. So, you know, when it comes to toilets that are going into new construction, those have to be high efficiency for sure. Thomas, if you want to talk a little bit about, you know, what are the requirements around replacing new, toilets that are the old, 3.5 or 5 gallon per flush toilets, that would be helpful, I think, in this conversation.
Certainly. So replacing old toilets is a rebated program through our conservation program that Stephanie could give you details on, but I don't think we need that right now. As far as policies to do things like we usually call it retrofit on resale, some cities have passed things like that, where if you sell your home along with the other things that have to be upgraded for safety reasons, you might have to upgrade your toilet if it's not a high efficiency one. But we haven't really engaged in much cities unless, Stephanie, do you have something you'd actually like to chime in on with this one?
Yes, and I apologize if my connection's not great. So I've been the sound's been going in and out. So at Alameda County Water District, we have a water use efficiency program to help both multifamily and commercial customers replace their high flow toilets. And those are, we've just moved the needle on that. It used to be 3.5 gallon per flush or more. And now we're going after even the 1.6s because the technology has improved tremendously. They're now really decent 1 gallon per flush toilets and even 0.8 gallon per flush toilets available. So we've got programs to encourage those replacements. And we're doing this water efficiency master plan, which Thomas mentioned earlier. And as part of that, we've evaluated the toilet programs extensively. We did a saturation survey where we surveyed folks in our service area to try and identify how many of these older toilets are out there. And that's, when I say older toilets, I mean the 3.5 gallon per flush or greater. And we found that we only have about 19% remaining. So it's a low number, but we are going to really push in the beginning of the launch of the water efficiency master plan when we roll it out, which will be this spring, summer. Those initial phases, we're going to really focus on trying to go after those toilets, and even some of those 1.6s. The early 1.6 gallon per flush toilets weren't really that reliable in the initial flush, so you would have to double flush. So we're also want to try and get those out of there as well. So that's what we're doing to try and encourage toilet replacements.
Anything with dual flushing?
Sorry,
We actually need to close out. We're running out of time here. So Stephanie, did you have one more thought to add?
Well, there is a code now, that's a law that was passed. I believe it's SB 407, where fixtures have to be replaced within a certain time frame. So that is on the books. It's just the enforcement aspect that maybe just needs to be bumped up a bit.
Great. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to recognize there have been some additional comments that have come in the chat in terms of suggestions, and we appreciate all those. We're going to be recording them and incorporating them into our analysis for our measures that we develop as part of the climate action plan. So we really appreciate everyone. And even if we didn't get a chance to address your question directly in the discussion, please know that we will be looking at those. And with that, we wanted to, again, remind you and ask you to please participate in our online virtual community forum for the climate action plan update. If you go to fremont.gov/CAP-considerate, you'll be brought to the landing page, and you can weigh in on all sorts of different ideas that we have put forth that we've seen in other communities, things that we know will help us achieve emissions reductions. And we want your thoughts so that we can understand, what would be feasible in Fremont. What are people really excited about? What are some of the concerns that people have with the possibility of moving forward with a specific strategy? So please do participate. You can also look at those considerations that other people have shared and post your own as well. And then finally, where we're at in our process, we have been gathering community input over the last handful of months. And we're moving into the stage where we're really developing out those, policies and measures that could go into the climate action plan, and we'll be doing an emissions reduction analysis of those with our consultant team and Ascent Environmental, and looking at some of the implementation possibilities and challenges associated with that in terms of costs and feasibility. So then we'll be developing a draft plan that will be reviewed internally by staff, and we'll also be bringing that to our various relevant boards and commissions, the Environmental Sustainability Commission, Planning Commission. We'll do some work sessions with City Council, and there'll be opportunities for the public to weigh in during all of those steps as well, before we go back and work to draft a final document where we incorporate additional feedback as necessary. So that's the timeline. And, we have a number of resources for you to stay connected. Our landing page for the Climate Action Plan update effort is fremont.gov/climate action. We'll be posting recordings of each of these sessions and additional information about the process as it becomes available, as well as any future workshops that we lead. You can also sign up for our city newsletter on sustainability, fremont.gov/FGC newsletter. FGC stands for Fremont Green Challenge, which is our residential climate action engagement platform. So if you're looking for ways that you can take action within your own household, the Fremont Green Challenge platform is a great way for you to sign up and understand your own footprint in your household in terms of, all of the different sectors: transportation, wastewater, energy, land use, and then you can explore ways to reduce your impact. And we've put into the platform a number of local resources to help you be able to do so. And then the final slide here just shows our contact information. Robbie and I are working closely together on coordinating the Climate Action Plan update, and you can contact either one of us for any follow-up questions you might have about the process, or questions, comments you might have in relation to this workshop. And just one more thing I wanted to add is we'll be taking all of the questions and comments that we've seen over this past week and extrapolating that into some common frequently asked questions that we'll post on our website as well. Thank you all again for joining us. It's been a great conversation, and I want to thank again our speakers from the city of Fremont as well as ACWD for making this a successful climate talk. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.